A public school superintendent faces deportation. The Secretary of War dishes out some long overdue fat shaming, and a preview of the most important cases about to be argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. All that and more on the Kylee Cast. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kylee Cast. I am Kylee Griswold, managing editor at The Federalist. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're just listening to the show, be sure to go check out the full video version on my personal YouTube channel or the Federalist channel on Rumble. And then like and subscribe there too. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at radio@thefederalist.com. I would love to hear from you. A couple of crazy and seemingly unrelated stories have my attention this week, but it turns out they are not completely disconnected. First is the absolutely insane case of Ian Roberts, an illegal immigrant who somehow became the superintendent of Des Moines Public Schools, which is the largest school district in Iowa. Roberts was arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement on Friday, and the details of the case are truly wild. According to ICE, Roberts came to the U.S. in 1999 on a student visa, so more than 25 years ago. Fast forward to 2020, and he becomes the superintendent of a school district in Pennsylvania. That was also the year he was charged with illegal weapons possession, because he had a firearm, even though people here without legal status can't legally possess a gun or ammo. It's against federal law. So he works in this Pennsylvania district for about 3 years, and then in 2023, he was secretly elected behind closed doors to be the first person of color to lead the Des Moines school district. This is despite the fact that he's an illegal immigrant without work authorization. Mind you, the Des Moines district contains more than 30,000 students. So in other words, tens of thousands of students were under the care and direction of an illegal alien. So finally, in May of last year, an immigration judge decides he's got to go, gives him a final deportation order. Then, this past Friday, officers find Roberts in his vehicle, they approach the car, and he speeds away to evade arrest. Later, they find the abandoned car, which was a school district supplied vehicle, by the way, and they arrest Roberts, who, despite his prior weapons charge, was in possession once again of a loaded handgun, a hunting knife, and $3,000 in cash. An ICE field office director said it best. He said, quote, "This suspect was arrested in possession of a loaded weapon in a vehicle provided by Des Moines Public Schools after fleeing federal law enforcement." He went on to say how this illegal alien was hired without work authorization, a final order of removal, and a prior weapons charge is beyond comprehension and should alarm the parents of that school district, end quote. Couldn't agree more. And yet, reportedly, thousands of people have shown up in protest outside the detention facility where Roberts is being held. Absolutely insane. This is today's Democrat Party. Not protesting on behalf of the kids and parents who got completely scammed by Ian Roberts, but on behalf of the illegal alien con man. Anyway, we'll come back to Roberts. Meanwhile, another horrific story caught my attention this week, and that was the murder of Logan Federico, a 22-year-old college student who was shot to death during a burglary in South Carolina earlier this year. Just awful. And as if the details of the crime itself weren't bad enough, the suspect, 30-year-old Alexander Dickey, had reportedly already been arrested 39 times and had 25 felonies. Here's Logan's dad recounting the details of his daughter's death in a now viral clip before the North Carolina House Judiciary Subcommittee meeting this week.
Think about your child coming home from a night out with their friends, laying down, going to sleep, feeling somebody come in the room and wake them, and drag her out of bed, naked, forced on her knees, with her hands over her head, begging for her life, begging for her hero, her father, me, that couldn't be there. She was 5'3". She weighed 115 pounds. Bang! Dead. Gone. Why? Because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 goddamn times, 25 felonies, was on the street. How about that? How good are we doing for our family? How good are you doing for your kids? He should have been in jail for over 140 years for all the crimes he committed. You know how much time he spent in prison? A little over 600 days in 10 years. He's only 30 years old. He was committing 2.65 crimes a year since he was 15 years old, but nobody could figure out that he couldn't be rehabilitated. Well, you'd have to put him in prison to see if he could be rehabilitated. Isn't that the idea of prison? You need to fight for the rest of our children, the rest of the innocents, and stop protecting the people that keep taking them from us. Please. You have the power. We put you in the power to do what you have to do. We're asking you, we're begging you all to stop this. 39 crimes in 10 years, 25 felonies. Can anybody here explain to me, well, how possibly he could be on the street? Possibly be on the street. How is it possible? And that career criminal, an hour later, went on a spending spree with her debit card. When they saw his face on a video, they didn't have to do a check. He was arrested so many times, they knew who he was. They knew exactly where to go get him. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic that I'm here today.
So both of these stories, the story of Ian Roberts and the story of the murder of Logan Federico, are shocking and awful for very different reasons. The story of Logan Federico's murder is shocking for what it exposes about the abject failure of law enforcement, the courts, and soft on crime nonsense that we have allowed to fester in immigrant without work authorization for years. But there is one major thing both these stories have in common, and that's that they both occurred in deep red states. Republicans have controlled the governorship, the state senate, and the state house in Iowa for 9 years, almost a decade, and in South Carolina for 23 years. 23. There is no reason why any judge who contributed to Alexander Dickey being out on the street after dozens of serious arrests and felonies shouldn't be impeached by the Republican-controlled state, house, and Senate. If the problem turned out to be, as some reports indicate, that for some reason Dickey's fingerprints weren't taken or recorded as they should have been, then the law enforcement personnel involved in that screw-up should resign or be fired. And all of this is ultimately the result of a soft-on-crime ethos where the criminal justice system is turned into a revolving door of violent repeat offenders that officials get lulled into releasing thanks to ridiculous rehabilitative and restorative justice rhetoric that's at the expense of law-abiding Americans who just want to work and play and sleep without fear of being gunned down for no reason. Any systems that focus on restorative and rehabilitative justice cannot do so at the expense of law-abiding Americans. We cannot have red states with deadly levels of incompetence like this. The Trump administration is obviously already cracking down on the third world blue cities like DC and Portland, where violent crime is through the roof. But we also can't let repeat offenders through the cracks and tolerate incompetence like this in red states either, even if it is less frequently. As for Ian Roberts, this should put to bed any and all criticism of Trump's push to shutter the Department of Education. What an absolute sham of a bureaucracy. But also, how on earth does a Republican trifecta state like Iowa not vet immigration status before hiring government employees? This is absolute insanity. Federalist executive editor Joy Pullman writes in a piece this week, quote, public documents show Roberts made many outrageous and contradictory claims about his history that should have prompted due diligence from numerous U.S. education employers, including that he worked on a security detail for Queen Elizabeth. In just the last 5 years, Roberts bilked American taxpayers out of more than $1 million in superintendent salaries, plus $400,000 to settle 3 lawsuits accusing him of hiring women over men while leading a Pennsylvania school system. That district could not verify his credentials, but still paid him $183,000 per year plus benefits for 3 years, end quote. Failures, failures, and more failures. You know, self-government requires just that we can govern ourselves. And moments like these, where beautiful young women are murdered by violent repeat criminals who never should have been out on the street, and illegal aliens with criminal charges and no work authorization are elevated to the highest ranks of a government education system, really call into question whether we're capable of governing ourselves. Democrats might reliably suck at governing, but incompetent Republicans need a better pitch to the American people than, well, we're not Democrats. That's the Kamala Harris way of campaigning.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I noticed.
And so that would be one change in terms of, but also I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
We've got to do better than that. If you cannot safeguard your state's resources and your constituents' most basic rights and freedoms, then by all means, give your seat to someone who will. Of War, Pete Hegseth had a message for military leaders this week. He convened hundreds of them at the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia on Tuesday, and his speech was refreshing, to say the least.
When it comes to combat arms units, and there are many different stripes across our joint force, the era of politically correct, overly sensitive, don't hurt anyone's feelings leadership ends right now. For too long, we've promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas, based on historic so-called firsts. This administration has done a great deal from day one to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department, to rip out the politics. But when it comes to any job that requires physical power to perform in combat, those physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it. It's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look.
Among other things, he condemned DEI, he stressed peace through strength, he said it's time to make our allies share the burden of defending the free world, it's about time, and emphasized that personnel is policy. Quote, no more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. No more climate change worship, no more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. As I've said before, and will say again, we are done with that. To say it was a dramatic improvement in messaging from the previous administration is the understatement of the century. Joining me now to discuss Pete Hegseth's speech and more is Federalist staff writer Shawn Fleetwood, who has an excellent piece today on the site about the military called "It Turns Out the Military's Biden-Era Recruitment Crisis Was a Leadership Problem After All." Shawn, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me, KG. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, always a pleasure. I'm so curious. You watched the Pete Hegseth speech, as did I. What stood out to you most from it? There was plenty there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would say it's a lot different than the typical speeches that you'll hear from past defense or now war secretaries, but different in a good way. I mean, he went up there and just told it like it was, highlighted so many of the existing problems that have been in the Defense Department and the Pentagon for many, many years under many different presidents. You've seen the pushing of this radical DEI ideology, this focus on personal identity over efficiency and lethality. He talked about the need of just basic physical, mental fitness standards, making sure that our troops, and that includes officers and generals, are just up to par and making sure that they're actually fit and able to serve in our forces. And it's not every day that you see the war secretary tell the generals to their face, like, you can't be fat to be in the military. That was pretty great. But I mean, it was just the type of boldness that's been so lacking in DoD leadership in the past. Just really needing to get our military back on track and correcting a lot of the longstanding issues that we've been seeing over prior generations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to hear Pete Hegseth say something like "fit, not fat" in a workout video with RFK Jr. It's another thing to see him gather all of the generals in the same room and tell them, "Hey, you need to be fit, not fat." That was definitely a change of tune from previous administrations, to put it mildly. You write in your piece that as of this week, actually, the Marine Corps has hit its recruiting target for the year, which follows on the heels of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force all hitting their goals even ahead of schedule, which, of course, was not the case under the Biden presidency, even though, as you point out in your piece, during that administration, many traditional standards were actually relaxed, so it should have been easier for them to hit their recruiting targets. What changed in that regard? Why are we suddenly hitting our goals?
Gee, I wonder what changed between last year and this year. The most amazing thing about this entire crisis, because it really was a crisis. I mean, you can't bring in enough young men and I guess you could say women to our forces. I mean, that's a major problem for all kinds of national security reasons. But the most amazing part has been watching the media and the Democrats twist themselves into pretzels, blaming everything except the leadership issue. They'll say it was COVID. They'll say it was the declining mental and physical health of our youth. They'll say it was a competitive job market. And those latter two are just issues that predated COVID that made it more difficult for the military to bring in new talent. But leadership matters. At the end of the day, leadership absolutely matters. And when you see a president that is pushing this racist DEI ideology, that is kicking troops out of the military for not getting an experimental vaccine, that is repeatedly looking at his watch as the bodies of 13 American soldiers that he got killed in Afghanistan are coming down the tarmac in flag-draped coffins, that stuff matters. Young people look at that, and that is not going to encourage them to serve in the military. And so when you have a president like Donald Trump, when you have a war secretary like Pete Hegseth, people who actually show that they have genuine care for the well-being of our troops and our service members, and people who understand that the purpose of the military is to protect the American homeland, that's the number one and only priority of our military, is to win wars. That stuff matters to people who are making big career decisions and looking and seeing if they want to serve in the military. And what I think was the most distressing part under the Biden presidency was you had grandparents and fathers who were saying, I don't want my grandkids or my kids to serve in this military because that's not the military that I served in. It's just this left-wing social experiment that's pushing this leftist dogma and telling patriotic Americans of all backgrounds that, sorry, if you love your country, if you have conservative mainstream beliefs, you're not welcome here. And so I think now that we've kind of gotten back on course, that's why you're seeing such a massive spike in recruitment months ahead of schedule for several of the branches, and why the media refuses to acknowledge that the failures of Joe Biden and the people in his administration have wrought on the military.
You write in your piece, quote, "From the very beginning, the Biden Pentagon's message to patriotic Americans was clear. You're not welcome here." Can you explain some of the ways that the Biden administration seemingly actually tried to weed conservatives out of the military?
Yeah. So one of the first things that the DoD did when the Biden administration came into power was it issued a stand down order on rooting out so-called extremism within the military. And keep in mind, this was right after the whole January 6th stuff. And you had, some veterans and service members that were involved in the protests and demonstrations in DC. And so really that was used as the kind of the prerequisite to go after these mainstream conservative thoughts within the military. And I actually think that there was a university in Arizona that had done a study on, the efficiency of this effort to root out so-called extremism, and it basically turned up nothing. And then you also had later on in the administration, of course, the COVID shot mandate, which now Secretary Hegseth has said is unlawful. And the DOD, or Department of War, I should say, is making efforts to bring some of those people back into service. But there were over 8,400 service members that were fired for declining to get this experimental injection that the administration barely made any medical or religious exemptions, granted any of those exemptions. And the very few that they did grant were of people mostly who were just leaving the service anyways, who were on their way out the door. And so that was, I think, kind of those key moments that showed the Biden administration saying, okay, who's really going to stand up for what's true? Who's really going to stand up for the Constitution? And those are the people that we need to kind of shuffle out the door so that we have a military that is more than willing to just be basically yes men and do whatever we order them to do. And of course, there's, a certain allegiance that you, of course, pledge when you go into the military and obeying orders. But you also have an obligation to the Constitution and to the American people. And I think that obligation is something that they were definitely trying to shatter with these type of various efforts.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, during the Trump administration, this current one, didn't they reinstate members of the military who had been dismissed over the COVID vaccine, or the COVID shot, as with their rank and back pay? Wasn't that part of the Trump administration's efforts?
Correct. So that was one of the executive orders that President Trump had issued when he came back into office. Hegseth has issued a couple memoranda to kind of further that along. But then you've been getting some reports from outlets like the Daily Caller about some of the, I guess, slow walking that we're seeing among the Pentagon bureaucracy to get these people fully reinstated. So it's still an ongoing process. I know that some veterans had recently just met with Hegseth and other officials at the Department of War involved in the reinstatement process. So hopefully we can get that sped up and get these people fully reinstated and with the full back pay and everything.
Yeah, super important, but just such a contrast between the two administrations. Like, as you say, you're not welcome here. What an obvious contrast between the two. As I'm sure you saw, the media reacted to Hegseth's speech almost immediately, as did the armchair pundits on Twitter, with cries of racism and sexism specifically. Oh, Pete Hegseth is banning women from the military. Oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Everything's racist. Everything's awful. One of them was journalist John Harwood, who had this lovely tweet that I'm going to put up for you all to see. Pete Hegseth has made clear that if he had his way, the U.S. military would have no blacks in leadership positions and no women at all. Which is interesting because Hegseth actually said that people who are too fat and lazy to fight in combat also aren't fit to be military leaders. So it's interesting that journalists would interpret this as Black Americans and women. Kind of seems like if there's any racism here, it might be coming from the other side. Shawn, your thoughts on this?
I have a lot of thoughts. A lot of them probably aren't printable or can be said on this podcast. But if I'm not mistaken, John Harwood, what's the word? He oversaw a Republican presidential debate. He moderated a debate, if I'm not mistaken. That's who this guy is. I mean, it's just completely ludicrous and such a disservice to all Americans who serve in the military. I mean, if you're an American in the military who's not white, why would you want DEI policy? Why would you want these types of racial quotas? If you're getting a promotion and you're getting promoted to a colonel or whatever rank, can you honestly say, yes, I got this based on the merits. I know that I got this based on the merits. And now you're putting those types of service members in a position where they have to wonder, did I get this because of my meritocracy, because of my efforts, because of the hard work and years of service that I put in? Or is it because the bureaucrats at the top and the woke generals want to check some sort of box here? And it's just a complete disservice to everyone around. But of course, people like John Harwood don't think about that because all they care about is fulfilling this leftist dogma, this leftist ideology that they are so wholly devoted to. And at the end of the day, our military suffers because of it.
Yes, absolutely. As it does when we lower physical standards as well. I would love to hear your reaction to Hegseth just mentioning that, the military is going back to one standard for combat. Like for people who will be in combat, no more of this like one standard for women, one standard for men to make sure that women can be admitted into combat. What do you think about that?
It's great. I absolutely love it. The idea of women in combat is actually a relatively new phenomenon. It was actually something that was instituted during the Obama administration. So it hasn't been around long, but what we've seen has not shown that it has improved the efficiency or lethality of the military at all. I believe the Marine Corps did a study under the Obama administration comparing an all-male unit to a mixed-sex unit, and the all-male unit vastly outperformed the mixed-sex unit. And so the message from Hegseth and the Trump administration is we're going to have one set of standards for everybody, all male standards. And if you can't meet that, then you're not qualified. It's that simple. And I think that that's so long overdue because, again, the left has made the Pentagon, the military, this social experiment that they've been trying out for several years now. And they're more focused on checking boxes than they are about fulfilling the number one mission of the military, which is to win wars and to protect the American homeland. And the thing about the military is it's supposed to be discriminatory. It's not for everyone. It's not for the weak-hearted or the weak-minded. It's for strong, capable individuals who have an interest in serving their country and who need to be the strongest to serve their country because these people protect us every day. They protect our freedoms, the ability for us to have this conversation right now. And so if you want to maintain those freedoms, you need the best and the brightest and the strongest. And to have clean, efficient, one standard for everybody is the only way that you're going to get that.
Yeah, and it's so cool, especially just when you put it in the context of this isn't just a military-specific recognition of biological reality. This is something that we're seeing across the board in the administration, where it's just, going back to the basics. Boys and girls are different. They're capable of doing different things. They're capable of doing some of the same things, but like these are just fundamental, immutable truths. And it's so refreshing to finally see people in leadership who are willing to just come out and say, hey, boys and girls are different. If women can meet these standards, that's amazing. We're not intentionally discriminating against women, but we need to maintain a standard of physical ability here. And if women can't meet it, well, then they can't be in combat in this way. So super refreshing. I also loved hearing Pete Hegseth just put to bed this stupid mantra that we heard throughout the whole prior administration and continue to hear from Democrats on the regular, which is diversity is our strength. That is the most meaningless, stupid, counterproductive phrase maybe ever. And just to hear Hegseth say, no, diversity isn't our strength. Unity is our strength. That was just such a breath of fresh air to hear from this administration.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that diversity is our strength doesn't really sit well when you're in the middle of a battlefield and getting shot out by the enemy, and you're sitting next to someone who's having a mental breakdown and they don't know what gender they are and can't figure out any of that stuff. I mean, when stuff like that was being perpetrated by the Biden administration and actively pushed, like, let's have all these pride events, let's celebrate gender identity and all of these great, wonderful things. I mean, China and Russia and all of our adversaries just laugh at us. I mean, these people, I mean, as egregious and, communist and horrible as these countries are, they actually understand that in order to win these worldwide geopolitical conflicts, you need to have a strong military. And that doesn't mean diversity is your strength. That means finding the best, most capable warriors you can to uphold your national priorities. And so the idea diversity is our strength, I absolutely agree. It's the stupidest thing that anyone could dream up, especially when it comes to the military.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really so crazy because under the previous administration, I think we were just bombarded with so much reality denial and just like stupid platitudes like that meant nothing and were just totally opposite to what is true and good. And to the point where there would be like TikToks for recruiting people to the military. And it's a service member who's also a drag queen who's going from their uniform to their drag uniform, whatever, dumb, like full makeup and the hair and all the rest. And that was supposed to recruit people to the military or be like a sanctioned thing. Like, how did these people not get in trouble for doing this? I think it was actively encouraged. Now looking back on that from where we are now, where you have Pete Hegseth saying no fatties, no beardos, no climate alarmism priorities, all of this stuff that, under the Biden administration, that feels like a fever dream now. It is so crazy that we actually lived through that insanity. And it's just so cool that we now have a Department of War that is focusing on fighting wars or being prepared to fight wars. So cool. So, I want to change gears a little bit, Shawn, to the Supreme Court. You also have a great piece on the Federalist this week that everyone should go and check out. We have oral arguments coming up for the next Supreme Court term. Go read Shawn's piece, The Federalist's Guide to the 2025 Supreme Court Term. Shawn, can you please preview what you think will be the 3 most important cases at the Supreme Court this term?
Yeah, we got a lot of great issues before the Supreme Court this year, as we always do. One of the most prominent cases, I would say, is a case called Childs v. Salazar. This is about a woman named Kylee Childs. She's a Colorado resident, a Christian, and she's a counselor. And she often meets clients who are dealing with things like trauma, addiction, and also issues related to sexual orientation, so-called gender identity, gender dysphoria, that type of stuff. Well, in 2019, the state of Colorado passed a law that prohibited so-called conversion therapy for minors. And so this basically prohibited Childs from fulfilling her obligations as a counselor and helping children who are dealing with these issues related to sexuality and helping them come to a biblical understanding of these issues and gender and stuff like that. And so in 2022, she filed a lawsuit alleging that the statute in question violates her First Amendment rights to free speech. The 10th Circuit had ruled against her in, I believe, 2023, 2024. I'm having trouble remembering the year. But the Supreme Court announced earlier this year in March that it would be taking up the case. That'll be one of the first oral arguments that we have. I believe it's taking place next week for the Supreme Court. Then you also have a case called Louisiana versus Kylee. This is a case that dates back to 2022 when the state of Louisiana passed a congressional map with a single Black majority district. A group of plaintiffs, had filed a lawsuit immediately after, represented by left-wing groups like the ACLU, and they alleged that this new map violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which basically says you can't discriminate on the basis of race in the voting context, and that the new map dilutes the voting power of Black Americans. And so a district court judge comes out, places an injunction that pauses that decision, and orders the state to redraw the map. The Supreme Court steps in, blocks that injunction temporarily. Litigation continues in the case, and the state ends up drawing a new map, this time with the second Black majority district. A different group of plaintiffs sue, this time alleging that the state unlawfully prioritized race in the creation of the map, and they allege that it violates the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. A separate district court comes out and issues an injunction blocking enforcement of this map. And ultimately, the Supreme Court paused that and ended up taking up the case. So what you have here in this situation is kind of this quandary that states have been put in, where if you take race into consideration too much in the redistricting process, you're going to be sued under the 14th Amendment. But if you don't take race into consideration enough in the redistricting process, you're still going to be sued. This time it's under Section 2 of the VRA. And so what the Supreme Court hopefully is going to address is whether race is permissible in the redistricting process, whether it violates the 14th and 15th Amendments. This is an issue that's been plaguing the lower judiciary for decades. It's an issue that Justice Clarence Thomas has been shouting about in his opinions for quite some time. So hopefully the Supreme Court will finally put this issue to bed once and for all.
Yeah, and Shawn, you would know because you lived to read Clarence Thomas shouting in his dissent. So.
Listen, Clarence, if you're out there, you want to grab lunch sometime, I'll shamelessly ask you to. I'm always free.
Clarence's biggest fan right here on the Kylee Cast today. Shawn, there's also a case at the court this term, Trump v. Slaughter, which could call something called Humphrey's executor into question. Can you explain for us that case and also why Humphrey's executor is important, what it means?
Yeah, so this is a case that actually kind of heated up in the past 2 weeks. So President Trump earlier this year had fired Rebecca Slaughter. She's a Democrat member of the Federal Trade Commission, and she had sued over her firing. A district court judge placed an injunction on that decision, basically allowing her to keep her job. And the Supreme Court granted a request from the Trump administration last week or the week prior, temporarily staying that injunction. But they also announced that they would be taking up this case on the merits and hearing oral arguments later this year. And one of the most notable questions that they asked the litigants to address was whether Humphrey's executor should be overturned. So Humphrey's executor is a case that dates back almost 100 years to the early 1930s, when President Herbert Hoover, a Republican, nominated William Humphrey to serve as a member of the Federal Trade Commission. Humphrey was confirmed by the Senate. I believe it's a full 7-year term. And then FDR comes into office, who is a Democrat, and he asks Humphrey to resign. And Humphrey says no, and FDR ultimately ends up firing him. Now, there was a legislation that Congress had passed at that time called the FTC Act, which basically attempted to constrain the ability of presidents to fire executive officials like Humphrey. So it basically said you can only fire these certain officials for these very specific reasons. And so Humphrey had died shortly after FDR fired him, which is really a heck of a way to go. But his estate, his executor, sued on his behalf, and he claimed that Humphrey was unlawfully terminated and basically challenging the executive power of the president to do this. Well, the case makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and in 1935, the justices, in a unanimous decision, ruled against Roosevelt. And they basically say that the provisions of the FTC Act are constitutional and that the firing of Humphrey was, in fact, unlawful. And so what this ruling basically did was it constrained the ability and kind of took away powers of the president to have full oversight of what have now been dubbed independent agencies. And basically helped birth what is now known as the administrative state, this kind of de facto fourth branch of government that kind of operates outside of the confines of the Constitution and the traditional role of separation of powers. And so I think what the court is signaling by agreeing to take up this case is that they are finally willing to definitively strike down Humphrey's executor and kind of return the powers that the court in the 1930s had taken away from the president, and kind of moving us back towards a system of proper separation of powers that our Constitution had established.
Right. Because the administrative state isn't just outside the three branches of government that the Constitution establishes. It's also outside of the accountability of the American people. If an elected official cannot get rid of somebody who is technically under their purview, then who exactly are they accountable to? Certainly not the American people in that case. It's just this sprawling bureaucracy that doesn't have to really answer for anything if they're not fireable. Which this is not the only case this term that deals with a disgruntled Trump-fired person. We also have Trump versus Cook, which is another case coming down, and another Trump case. Actually, it might be a pair of cases related to Trump's tariffs. So, Shawn, I don't know if you have anything interesting to say about either of those cases, but lots of Trump-related cases this term.
Yeah, for sure. They're the pair of cases, I believe it's called Learning Resources, Inc. versus Trump, and then VOS Solutions versus Trump. Those will deal with the president's tariff power under federal law and whether he has the power to kind of universally implement these tariffs. And then Trump v. Cook, which centers on the president's firing of the federal governor board member Lisa Cook, who is a Democrat appointee. But both of those cases, or kind of all of these cases, center around what's known as the emergency docket, which, if I could just kind of address what exactly that is, because I think the media have done such a, to give them credit, a good job of sowing disinformation on this issue. So the Supreme Court,
the only thing they're good at.
The only thing, absolutely. So there are two key tracks that cases take to get to the Supreme Court. The first is called the merits docket, which is the more traditional way that cases make their way to the court, which is the case is fully litigated at the trial or district court level. They're fully litigated at the appellate level, and then either one of the parties can decide to petition the Supreme Court to take up the case. You need at least 4 justices to agree to hear a case. The court can decide whether they take it up or not. And so that's the more traditional route. The emergency docket is a bit different. And so I guess using the administration is the best way to do this. You will have, let's say the Trump administration orders a certain policy or fires a certain official. That immediately gets challenged, and the plaintiff requests the district court to place an injunction on that decision. The district court grants the injunction, and the Trump administration wants to appeal to the appellate level, to have them pause that. If the appeals court rejects that motion, they can then appeal to the Supreme Court's emergency docket. And at that point, the Supreme Court can decide whether they want to pause that injunction, thereby granting the administration or party's request, or they can deny it and allow that injunction to remain in place. And so what we've seen in a lot of these cases, not all, but a lot of them, is the Supreme Court will in fact issue a temporary stay on those lower court injunctions. It's not a final ruling on the merits of the case. It is simply a temporary pause on that specific court action while litigation on the merits of the issue percolate and continue throughout the lower judiciary. So the issue and the merits of the issue might ultimately come back up to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is basically saying in that moment that this specific court action, we believe that the party that made the request to pause it has shown that they will be irreparably harmed if the injunction is allowed to stay, and that they will likely succeed on the merits of the case. So again, it's not a definitive final ruling on the legal issue at question. It is simply a temporary or interim, as Justice Kavanaugh likes to call it, court action to allow the case to fully litigate throughout the lower judiciary.
Very helpful. Thank you for correcting the media's disinformation here on the Kylee Cast. You heard it here. No, this is all super helpful. And Shawn, readers should definitely check out your piece for more helpful information about these cases, The Federalist Guide to the 2025 Supreme Court Term. Before I let you go, Shawn, just in the last minute here, you are not, for listeners who don't know this, you are not only the resident Clarence Thomas fanboy, but you are also the Federalist's office quoter in chief. So I have not been able to do a culture cut on the Kylee Cast in the past few weeks because there's just been so much news that we have to get to. I likely won't get to a culture segment today either. So I just have to ask you, as the office quoter in chief on staff, have you watched the paper yet?
I have not. It is on my to watch list. I've been kind of busy finishing out watching New Girl, which I had recently gotten into. The first 4 seasons are great, but the last couple are kind of slow for me. Don't really do it for me. But yeah, I haven't watched the paper yet. I'm kind of hesitant to, but I did tell one of our colleagues that I would watch it and write a review on it. So
I'm excited to see it.
Stay tuned at the Federalist for my likely negative review of the paper.
Well, I do have to say, and maybe it's just because I went in with the lowest expectations imaginable, but I have really enjoyed the paper. I finished it a night or two ago, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's definitely a different pace than The Office because the lead characters are not quite a Michael Scott character, so it doesn't have that. There is no Michael and Dwight to keep the clip going quite as fast as The Office, but it was not nearly as woke as I thought it would be, despite how I thought they were about to set up some of the characters. And it was shockingly funny. Like, it had me laughing out loud at numerous points. And after watching the preview for it, I really, really had very low expectations, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. My husband and I both did. Tons of fun. You should definitely watch it. And there's like a few little nuggets where they reference The Office through Oscar, not to spoil anything, but if you should know, everyone knows already that Oscar's in it. But those were like a little hokey and cheesy, but also kind of cute. It's like, okay, this is a beloved show, so it's okay to reference it. But beyond that, truly very fun show. So I'm curious to hear if your review matches mine or if you're going to just be way harsher on it than I was, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah. And I love to hear that you're watching New Girl too, because Jess is the worst part of that show. The boys are where it's at.
Yes.
The boys are the reason to watch New Girl. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I look forward to hearing your review,
definitely
Shawn.
The best character.
Yeah. Hands down, the best character. Nick is a close second. So
yes.
Yeah. Well, Shawn, thanks so much for joining me. We are all, I think I can speak for all of our listeners and readers. We are all waiting with bated breath for your paper review. But everyone, please go check out Shawn's recent piece on the military. Let me see here. Once again, that title is, "It Turns Out the Military's Biden-Era Recruitment Crisis Was a Leadership Problem After All," and his piece, "The Federalist Guide to the 2025 Supreme Court Term." Thanks so much for being here, Shawn.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
Great to see you. All right, that's all for me today. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Kylee Cast. Once again, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll be right back here next week with more. Until then, just remember, the truth hurts, but it won't kill you.